Hello, and welcome to the second session of our three-part Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Virtual Learning Exchange. If you missed part one, the recording is available on Healthcare Excellence Canada's website, and participants who registered for this three-part series will have received an email with a link to the recording. I'm Maria Judd, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and Engagement with Healthcare Excellence Canada, and my personal pronouns are she and her. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today to reflect, learn, and unlearn together. Before we begin, there are some tools to assist with the full participation of everyone who's joined the call today. During the session, we invite all participants to share reflections and questions using the chat feature. However, due to the large number of people who are joining us from across the country, you may not see all the comments, but we want to assure you that our speakers will be seeing the comments and be sharing them and reflecting on them as feasible as we move through our time together today. We're also pleased to offer today's session with simultaneous interpretation. I invite you to select French from the interpretation menu at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to hear the French audio for today's session. In addition, visual interpretation is available in American Sign Language as well as Langue de Signes Québécoise. ASL and LSQ interpretation will be visible on everybody's screen for all the participants throughout the duration of the webinar. Today's session is intended to create space and time for reflection, learning, and unlearning together. Please note that there are supports available in French and English to debrief about the content discussed and to support everyone's well-being. We appreciate that discussions on race, racism, white privilege, and white supremacy can be really uncomfortable and can trigger feelings of discomfort or distress. So the supports are there for anyone who would like the opportunity to connect with someone, to debrief or support during the session and for 3 hours afterwards. The number to call will be in the chat feature, and it is 1-855-529-9463. If there's a lot of calls to this service, you may be invited to leave a voicemail, and your call will be returned from a private number. If you require support using ASL LSQ, please contact Canadian Health Services through Skype. And finally, just wanted to note that this session is being recorded, and the recording will be available after today's session. At Healthcare Excellence Canada, we recognize that we're still learning how to partner meaningfully and respectfully with First Nations, Inuit, Métis, governments, organizations, and many other communities across the country. As part of this journey, we're working together to enhance cultural safety and humility in healthcare systems. Today, we're gathering virtually from a variety of places across the country, and I would like to recognize the traditional territory of my home office on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation, also known as Ottawa. I'm grateful to live, work, and play here. There's a large tree outside of my window, which reminds me of the teachings I've been grateful to receive and the enduring presence of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people across this land. I know many of you are joining us from across North America, and I invite you to take a moment to reflect on the traditional territory and the original inhabitants where you reside. If you're unfamiliar with the territory where you are and its history that has been built and preceded, Native Land Digital is a great resource, and we'll share the link to this in the chat. I also want to recognize that this session is taking place during Black History Month, and Black History Month invites us to listen and learn from people of African descent. This series is designed to be that, an opportunity to listen, to reflect, to learn, and to unlearn. I'm really grateful to be joined by my co-host, Denise McCuaig, a Métis elder and Indigenous coach who's been an Indigenous advisor through a number of boards and committees, including but not limited to with the Mental Health Commission of Canada, the Simultaneous Indigenous Cultural Safety Training Program, and Healthcare Excellence Canada. And she was the Director of Aboriginal Health for the Interior Health Authority in British Columbia. We also have our producers, Kelly Ripley, Sheena Powell, and Jill Ritchie, who are operating behind the scenes today and providing all of us with technical support. Over 1,600 people have registered for today's session, and we have a diverse group of individuals participating from all regions of the country and internationally, representing a broad range of voices and experiences within healthcare as well as other sectors. I wanted to share with you a little bit about Healthcare Excellence Canada as your host for this series. Healthcare Excellence Canada is a new organization with a relentless focus on improving healthcare with and for everyone in Canada. Launched in the spring of 2021, Healthcare Excellence Canada brings together the Canadian Patient Safety Institute and the Canadian Foundation for Healthcare Improvement. We recently launched our first strategy, developed with input from over 1,100 people across the country. It reflects what excellence in healthcare means to them, the issues that matter most, and how we can help. Together, our purpose is to shape a future where everyone in Canada has safe and high quality healthcare. Our strategy focuses on improving care of older adults with health and social needs, improving care closer to home and community with safe transitions, and ensuring we're learning from and improving our health systems as we move through the pandemic. We're working with people across the country to identify and spread innovations, better ways of organizing funding and delivering care, building capabilities, and catalyzing policy change so we can really sustain large-scale improvements that will benefit more people across the country. I invite you to take a look at our website and our new strategy and to join us in our work of shaping a future where everyone in Canada has safe and high quality healthcare. Healthcare Excellence Canada's approach to fostering a foundation of understanding of equity, diversity, and inclusion is an ongoing journey of learning and unlearning. And we know as an organization embarking on this work, we have much to learn and unlearn, and it will impact everything we do. Who we partner with, how we partner, how we design our programs, how we deliver our programs, how we evaluate and think about impact and success of our programs, the difference we can make together. As we move along our learning journey, we invite you today to join us. And we're all seeking to ensure that our approach is evidence-informed, reflects the learning and the action happening across the country, and reflects emerging learning, unlearning, and thinking. I'm grateful for Denise and for her co-chairing the advisory group that co-designed this EDI Virtual Learning Exchange series and for co-hosting today's session. And I'm going to turn things over to her now. Over to you, Denise.
Merci, Maria. It's an honor to be here. I wanted to just acknowledge the advisory group, the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Virtual Learning Exchange. These individuals that you see named on the screen before you come with knowledge of the health system, lived experience, represent pan-Canadian health organizations, and provincial quality councils. And they were instrumental in providing guidance and insight to this learning exchange, which is the two-part session we're participating in now, and then a third one coming in March. And I'd really like to acknowledge the thoughtfulness that they provided in ensuring that there would be emotional supports available, ensuring that we would have full accessibility and interpretation in many ways, so that many people could participate in this opportunity to learn and unlearn. And so I thank them for their time and their efforts. And I thank them for their guidance. Today's session, Opening Ourselves, an Introduction to Anti-Oppression Practices and Frameworks, is the second session in a third-part series and a direct follow-up to the first session. There's been a high level of interest in the series, which was clear in the significant number of individuals who participated in our previous session. And if you were unable to join us, a recording is available on the website. The link will be shared in the chat. And as a registered member of this learning series, you should have also received an email with that link. There were many rich and thought-provoking concepts that were shared during the previous session. One that truly resonated for me was the concept of collective liberation, that what we are learning and unlearning is good for all people. It certainly has had me stopping to reflect on where in my life do I experience privilege and how can I use that to be an ally for others. And so I look forward to this continued learning journey together in this session. It is once again my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Ed Connors and Stephanie Nixon. Ed is of Mohawk and Irish ancestry. He is a psychologist who has worked with First Nations communities across Canada since 1982 in both urban and rural centres. His current work includes consultation and community training to assist First Nations in the development of restorative justice programs. Stephanie Nixon is a full professor in the Department of Physical Therapy and Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. She completed her PhD in Public Health in 2006 at the University of Toronto and a postdoc at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa in 2008. She has conducted workshops on the COIN model with more than 100 groups, including universities, hospitals, community-based organizations, and professional associations across Canada and internationally. I'd like to now hand it over to Stephanie and Ed. Ed will lead us through the beginning of this program with an engaging and thought-provoking session. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Denise, Megwich, Nyawa, for the introduction. And I welcome all those who have joined us in our first gathering for these teachings, and those who are new, who are just having the opportunity now to join us. And for that reason, I will introduce myself further so for your benefit, in addition to what Denise has said. I am, my name also is Wabanong Benesi Kwaikwetkan, and I'm Mohawk and Irish ancestry from Ganawagi Mohawk territory and the town of Mount Royal. And I'm Wolf Clan is my clan from Ganawagi. So I share with you that so you understand that as my mother was born and raised in our community of Ganawagi, my father and the town of Mount Royal overlooking Montreal, I often say that I come from two sides of the river. Two sides of the river meaning the St. Lawrence River, and two sides of two different worlds, two different worldviews. A lot of times people today don't acknowledge or recognize that we are made up of many, many differences, that Creator created us this way, and that Creator created us with these differences for purpose, for good purpose, and that ultimately we're left as human beings to figure out how then to acknowledge, honor, and respect those differences, and in addition then to find what it is that makes us common or the same as human beings. What can then bring us together? And that ultimately is what I refer to as a process of peacemaking. So in these teachings that we share with you, where that's fundamental to me is the concept of making peace. How do we actually come to a place of acknowledging the differences that we have, honoring and respecting those, and then finding underneath that the foundation of what is common between all of us as human beings that can then bring us together in a place of peace. So my parents came to meet each other and fall in love. And they did this process of what I would call peacemaking, which was love, based on love. And then I was gifted with life as a result of that experience that came from their love for one another, and which they shared for many, many years, actually over 50, well, almost 70 years. When my mother passed away recently at 98, my father at age 90. So I've had that experience, and that's where my teachings come from, of understanding, how it is that we can actually live together in peace. So what I share with you now, I share with you with those teachings and with that understanding, in honoring and respecting all of the differences that we have, and inviting you to explore further some of those differences that exist in my world and the world of our Indigenous people. So that's why I introduce in the prayer that I'm going to now share with you, or what we sometimes refer to as the Thanksgiving address, which I say every day when I begin my day, which sets my thinking to understand and give thanks for all of what we've been given. And we sometimes refer to, and I refer to this as a prayer of gratitude. So I'm going to show you slides, or you're going to see slides which match with my words as I share with you these thoughts. And I invite you to explore these thoughts in your own minds as we come together in this teaching. The visuals, which you will now see coming up, brings us into the thought of what I've just shared with you, that we are all different, but yet the same. And so here is the prayer, or what I offer is an offering of gratitude to Creator. And this is the way we say in our teachings from an Indigenous worldview. Many of our people, well, almost all, speak to this in a way of saying our first thing that we need to do when we begin everything, and we do this when we begin teachings, is to offer thanks, beginning with giving thanks for the life we have, and giving thanks to Creator for that life, but then also offering thanks for all those things that support our lives. So as we now look and to come together as one, and we see through two eyes, one human family, I say these words and share them with you. We're grateful, and we give thanks, Creator, for this day. We're grateful for Brother Sun, who brings the light to this day so that we can see and appreciate the beauty of all of your creation. We're grateful for the warmth that Brother Sun brings to Mother Earth, so that all of creation can grow to the fullest of their potential. And we give thanks, Creator, for the trees and for the plants. We're grateful for them, that they continue to support our lives and give of their lives in support of our lives. We're especially thankful for the food plants and for the medicine plants. We give thanks for those flower plants, those ones that give beauty to all of your creation. We give thanks, Creator, and we're grateful for the healing spirit that comes this day through the eastern doorway, that brings to us the gifts to help us to heal our physical beings, so that we might live in peace this day with all of your creation. For these gifts, we are grateful. We give thanks, Creator, for the healing spirit that comes this day through the southern doorway. We're grateful for the waters, the medicine waters that give life to all of your creation. And we're grateful for the water beings within that water, those beings that give of their lives in support of our lives so that we might live. We're grateful for. And we give thanks, Creator, for the healing spirit that comes this day through the southern doorway, that brings to us the gifts to help us to wash away the hurts and pains from our minds, so that we might live in peace this day with all of your creation. For these gifts, we are grateful. And we give thanks, Creator, for the healing spirits that come through the western doorway. We're especially grateful for Grandmother Moon, who rises in the sky and guides us in the cycles of life and death, and guides the female side of life in their special work with all of your creation. I'm grateful, Creator, for the healing spirit that comes at night through the western doorway, that brings to us the gifts to help us to see more clearly, to hear more clearly, to think more clearly, and to speak more clearly. And we give thanks, and we're grateful, Creator, for the winged brothers and sisters who guide us, teach us, and nurture us with their gifts. We're especially grateful that they give of their lives in support of our lives so that we might live. And we give thanks that they help us to wipe away the hurts and pains from our hearts so that we might live in peace this day with all of your creation. For these gifts, we are grateful. We give thanks, Creator, for the healing spirit that comes this day through the northern doorway. We're grateful for the great white spirit bear, brother and sister, who guide us, teach us, and nurture us on our spiritual healing journeys. We're grateful and we give thanks, Creator, for the four-leggeds. We're especially grateful for the four-leggeds who teach us with their teachings. And especially we give thanks to those who have given of their lives in support of our lives so that we might live. And we're grateful, Creator, for the healing spirits that come through the northern doorway this day, that bring to us the gifts to help us to endure the most difficult times of our lives so that we might go through these times and become stronger and better human beings for them. For these gifts, we are grateful, and we say, Miigwech Nyawa. O Bojoma Shomas Bojona Komas Wabano Bene Sekwekwechka. We're grateful and we give thanks, Creator, for Mother Earth, for her continued love and care and nurturing of our lives. Despite the disrespect and the harm we've caused her, she continues to love us, care for us, and nurture us. And by doing so, she teaches us the lessons that we need to know of unconditional love. For these gifts, we are grateful, and we say, Miigwech Nyawa. O Bojoma Shomas Bojona Komas Wabano Bene Sekwekwechkan. We give thanks for the healing spirits that come through your sky world. We're especially grateful for the great thunder being who brings the waters, the medicine waters, to Mother Earth to heal her, cleanse her, and nurture her. By doing so, she can continue to support our lives. We give thanks, Creator, for the four winds that bring the medicines of the four directions and the four seasons to us and cleanse the air that we breathe so that we can continue to live. For these gifts, we're grateful, and we say, Miigwech Nyawa. O Bojoma Shomas Bojona Komas Wabano Bene Sekwekwechka. We're grateful and give thanks, Creator, for all those in your universe, for the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the planets, that they continue to live together in harmony and balance. And by doing so, they teach us the lessons we need to know to live in peace with all of your creation. For these gifts, we are grateful. And finally, Creator, we give thanks to you for your continued love and care and nurturing of Mother Earth, that you heal her, cleanse her, and nurture her so that she can provide us with the medicines and the medicine people who continue to support our life's journey. We're grateful and we give thanks, Creator, that you continue to care for and nurture and heal our elders in the latter parts of their days so that they might live in peace for the remainder of their days. For these gifts, we're grateful. And finally, we give thanks, Creator, for your continued love and care and nurturing that you provide us with spirit guides who guide us on our life's journeys. For these gifts, we're grateful. For all these things, we give thanks. And for those things that we have forgotten, we now remember and we give thanks for. We say, Miigwech Nyawa. Now our minds are as one. With those thoughts in mind, and as with our minds hopefully now as one, we'll now, and I invite you to form a virtual connection with each other. In addition to our minds, that we extend our ways of knowing each other and where we're from today, as we are many gathered in a virtual gathering in these teachings. We'd like to extend the opportunity for you to tell us, to show to each other where you're from, so that you can actually then identify, and we can identify collectively the connection that we're sharing today in these teachings. To do so, we're going to invite you to answer to this poll and identify the region where you come from. And I'm going to invite you to do this differently, as opposed to from the political boundaries that are presented and often created artificially. I'm inviting you to use perhaps the more realistic, natural, environmental boundaries that exist, that are identified by the watersheds that you come from. The first of those watersheds that I'm going to identify is that of the Arctic watershed, the section of the lands of what we call Turtle Island, where the waters flow out to the northern seas. So if you could actually identify that for us, you can check on that one. If you could bring up, please, the poll again, because for some reason the poll has gone from my screen. And it's hard for me to be able to identify it without seeing the poll. I invite you. Oh, I see. We've already gone through. So I'll speak to then where these places are from, as people are already responding. The Pacific watershed, of course, the lands where the waters flow from the mountains, from the Rockies down to the sea. And then those are the prairie watershed, those who are out on the lands, on the flatter lands, where the waters drain from the lands towards from the north, south into the Gulf of Mexico. And those are the lands of what we often speak of as Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba region. And then we have a land and a watershed that is the Northern Shield watershed of the Ontario that flows down into the Great Lakes. And then we have the St. Lawrence Atlantic watershed of Quebec that flows out into the northern waters and also into the Atlantic and down into the St. Lawrence. And then finally, we have the Atlantic watershed, which is the Atlantic watershed of the Atlantic provinces, where the waters flow out into the Atlantic Ocean. And then finally, we must also recognize and invite those who are outside of these watersheds, which I see a very little group, but they're there, and welcome to you as well. So from the Arctic to the outside, we see almost a Christmas tree, or what I might refer to in our teachings as a tree of peace. Lovely to see you all, and good to have the opportunity to know where we're all from. I'll now turn to sharing with you a teaching which I have that ties to all of what I've been saying in different ways as we began. And the teaching that I'm going to share with you is a teaching called the Two-Row Wampum. It comes from my Haudenosaunee ancestors, and this teaching ties to the ways in which my ancestors made peace with one another, because even prior to the contact, we had had the experience of experiencing difference between each other throughout Turtle Island. We even had many, many different languages, and we still have many of those that still survive. We had many cultures, many ways of being. And in order to find peace and live on Turtle Island together, we had to develop ways in which we could establish those peace and those peaceful relations. The ways that my Haudenosaunee ancestors did that was by using this kind of what we call a wampum belt. This is made out of beads. And it was actually made and drilled out of the shells that they found on the ocean shores. Those shells they then shaped into beads and formed and created these belts. The belts, within each belt is a teaching. It teaches something different about the relationship between the two parties that would come together, and this would be exchanged, and that would speak then to what the agreement was for peace and how we would establish peace and maintain that peace. In 1613, my Indigenous ancestors, the Haudenosaunee people, or as you might recognize them, the Mohawk people, had first contact with those who came from Europe, who were the Dutch. And those Dutch people came, of course, with many different differences, many, not just in language, but in clothing and in many different ways, including what we had never seen before, which was called a ship. And so my ancestors then formed this agreement with them in order to establish peace and maintain peace with them so we could share the lands together. And what it said was, and in the teachings, very basically, the two purple rows, one represents, it said, you, the Dutch people in your ship, and the other, us in our canoe. And the white represents us going down the river of life together. And as long as we go down that river and don't cross into each other's paths, then we can live in peace with one another. What it also said in more detail when we begin to think of how do we put peace into action? Well, the knowledge of our ancestors said this, and this comes also out of the teachings of this two-row. It said, we have many differences between us. Clearly, you're in a ship, we're in a canoe. We have differences in language. We have difference in our cultures, in our customs, in our ways, in our ceremonies. But we also, first of all, have things that are the same. We eat the same foods. We breathe the same air. We drink the same water. We have the same color of blood. We have many things that establish that we are the same. But we also then recognize, once we acknowledge how we are the same and what makes us human, that we can then establish our peace upon, we then can, even with respect, honor the differences that exist between us. The differences that we carry for each other benefits. Because when we actually honor and respect those, we can share those differences and learn from each other, and we will both benefit and then be able to live in peace on this land. The unfortunate outcome of this was the teaching. And it's also led to us being able to acknowledge and recognize what we call today two-eyed seeing, the ability to see with two eyes, one from one cultural way of knowing and the other from the other worldview, and that we can use both. And that's what this teaching spoke to. We can use both to live peacefully with one another if we live equally, live with equality and with respect for one another. That's what was in this teaching. Unfortunately, the Dutch thinking was not the same, and we came to know this in time because what they wrote in their peace treaty, in their writings, actually spoke about not equality, but inequality. It spoke about them being our fathers, us being in essence their children, and that they would look out and take care of us. So their view was looking down upon us and not with that understanding we had of seeing each other equally. Today, this teaching still exists because our teachers said that it will stand as we presented it. This will stand for as long as the river shall flow, as long as the grass shall grow, and as long as the sun shall shine. It stands today, and today we now are challenged to continue to find how to live out what we had agreed to. So I share that with you as a reflection. Again, I share it, and I share it with honor and respect for what your teachings are and what your beliefs are. I do not say that this is the only way or only the right way, but I invite you to consider these thoughts and hopefully enter into dialogue with others about these thoughts that we share with you today. Miigwech, Nyawa, thank you. I'll share now. I'll pass the screen over to my friend Stephanie.
Thank you, Ed. Greetings all. Good to be with you. I'm a settler, born and raised, and joining you today from Treaty 13 territory. Let's continue moving forward with one more poll to keep understanding who's in the Zoom room today. Can we have the second poll up, please? We may or may not be doing the second poll. What the second poll is inviting us to reflect on is whether each of you in the room already participated in our first session back in January, or the second option, you weren't there that day, but you watched a recording of that Jan 13 workshop. Or some of you, we understand, both were in the room that day and have looked back at the recording. You've done both. And then this fourth category called neither, but boy, am I ever looking forward to seeing that first recording because it will help me understand where we're going today. We were interested in the results of that poll to just help us understand who's here and drive what we're doing today. From what we can see here, we have a whole lot of folks who joined us in the Jan 13 session. Yeah, and if the polls look for you like they do for me, they've come and gone off the screen pretty quickly. So if you are someone that didn't have a chance to register your answer with this poll, our apologies. Just a tech glitch on our side. Future polls are coming. We'll do our best to leave them up nice and long on the screen for you. So thank you for your patience with us. But what we learned from this poll that collected information from some of you is that some were with us in the first session. Others were not, but saw the recording, and quite a number of you actually haven't seen it yet, but might going forward. And that's helpful to us. Ed, I think we did plan the right workshop here because what we thought is that that might be the case. And so we'd like to go forward by first offering a bit of a refresher. Some of the key messages that we came to you with in the last workshop, but I'll share with you that your feedback was very clear to us after that first session. You let us know that you want to continue down this path of learning and unlearning, and that you want to move from insights to action, that you're interested in application, that you're interested in the question of how do I integrate this into the way I walk in the world? And so what we're going to do is first the short look back, and then 2 new teachings that are related to action, that give you ways of thinking about how to mobilize these ideas. One from me, and then Ed will be back with a second teaching. So if we could move now to the slides. For those who saw the first part of this series, you'll recall that we organized our thinking around a single idea, a single question. And the question was, what is my work to do? What is my work to do on anti-racism, on justice, on equity, diversity, and inclusion, based on the body I'm in, how I am structured in history? That was the through line. And we responded to that question using a framework based on the metaphor of a coin. You'll also recall that we put you to work, and we want to put you to work again. We gave you written assignments to do during the session, and we're picking up that practice. We'd like you to find now the original notes that you wrote to yourself when participating in that first session, or if that wasn't you, to create this now for yourself. We have 3 questions we want you to write down and make possible to answer for yourself as we're going. The first is, what insights are landing for me? The learnings and the unlearnings. Number 2, we know that we cannot think our way out of oppression. It is embodied work. And so to nurture the practice of tuning into embodiment, our second question is, how do I feel during this learning and unlearning? We are socialized to have all kinds of feelings while we do this work. Some energize us and move us forward. Others are designed to stall us. They are designed to interfere with progress in anti-oppression. I'm talking about guilt and shame and overwhelm. So let us come to understand those feelings. Let's make friends with them so we can recognize them and quickly transition them to responsibility for accountable action. Which takes us to our third question. Learning is not the point. Learning is not the end. It is a means to the end of action toward material change, right? Change in the real world. So what are my next steps for learning in action? You'll also recall that right up front, it's important for us to understand that the ideas that I'm sharing today, all of them, they are not mine and they're not new. They're not mine and they're not new. These are ideas that come from a genealogy of Black and Indigenous thinkers, and that my understanding, albeit partial, of these ideas is thanks to present day carriers of these wisdoms, many of whom I note here. So let's go back to that metaphor of a coin. A few key points just to jog our memory so we can scaffold and go forward. You'll recall the coin metaphor has 3 parts: the coin itself and the top and the bottom of the coin. The coin itself is the historic system of inequality, the big structure that was here before we were all born, that has shaped our nation, our institutions, our fields, and even ourselves. And we find ourselves on the top or bottom of a coin because of how we are structured in history, who we happen to be. If who we happen to be aligns with the domination side of this power structure, we receive an unearned advantage. We did nothing to earn it. We call that privilege. And the opposite is also true. If how we are structured in history locates us, we find ourselves on the bottom of the coin, we receive unearned disadvantage or oppression. And recall that it's not that there's one coin for all privilege and oppression. There are many, many different coins. And the important concept advanced by Black scholars Kimberly Crenshaw and Patricia Hill Collins, that we must consider how all of these coins intersect to create complex arrangements of advantage and disadvantage, depending on context, time, and space. So all of us are on the top of some coins and the bottom of other coins at the same time. And let's link this to equity. This is where we invited folks to put their mind's eye on the bottom of the coin, to ask ourselves, what are the common terms we have for the groups of people whose outcomes are worse because of how they're structured in history, because of the unearned disadvantage they receive by finding themselves on the bottom of a coin. And we had many terms, didn't we? Vulnerable groups, disadvantaged communities, high-risk groups, at-risk groups, hard to serve, hard to reach, priority populations, key neighborhoods. My apologies to the interpreters. I'm going fast. And then I asked us to put our mind's eye to the top of the coin and asked, what are the matching terms we have? What is the vocabulary we have for the groups of people whose outcomes are better because of the unearned advantage they receive? And we realized we don't have any. We do not have a vocabulary, a matching vocabulary. Even trying to imagine such terms is clunky. You know, unfairly advantaged populations, free lift groups. And that when we think about equity, we don't just often disappear the top of the coin, we disappear the coin itself. And what ends up happening is that we frame equity, we frame our efforts around EDI and justice as exclusively the terrain of the bottom of the coin. And this is dangerous. This is harmful. It is a misdiagnosis to disappear the coin and the top of the coin. Why? See if you can call it up. Why? Why is this so harmful? Why does this lead to the performance of EDI as opposed to transformative action on it? At least two of the reasons are because it limits the thinkable solutions to those that address the problem of the bottom of the coin, but not the problem of the coin that's bad for all. That's what we want to be dismantling. That's the problem. And it also limits us from seeing the problematic orientation of those of us like me who find ourselves on the top of most coins and related. And this is big. Wherever you are right now, stop, pause, take a deep breath. If we can land this insight, it offers an incredible opening for new transformative action. You ready? How does disappearing the top of the coin allow someone like me who finds herself on the top of most coins, how does it allow me to understand myself in EDI work? How does it allow me to understand my motivation? How does it allow me to be seen by others if we disappear the top of the coin? It allows me to be off the page, doesn't it? To understand myself as neutral, as unconnected, to see my motivation as altruistic, generous, courageous even. But what am I when I'm on the top of the coin? It's not neutral. I'm complicit. I am part of this system of inequality. There is no opting out of these coins. There is no neutral. When we are on the top of the coin, we have been socialized to reproduce it until we don't, until we stop, until we can come to see it and find ways to interrupt our complicity. Why? Not for people on the bottom, but for all of us. As Denise said at the beginning, because collective liberation is the goal, this coin is bad for all of us. So what is our role then for those coins where we find ourselves on top? It is to show up and mobilize across the coin in solidarity with folks on the bottom of the coin, bringing the unique advantages that we have when we're on the top of the coin, which is our power and our safety, the benefit of the doubt we are given, the spaces where we are allowed to access, the entitlement we walk with in life. And how? What are the ways to mobilize resistance and solidarity? Well, if we can tune into the way that these systems of inequality operate, those are the same opportunities for resistance. So we offered these three interrelated levels: the institutional level, the interpersonal amongst us, and especially the internal. Question number 2, right? How does it feel as I do this work? I need to tune in, learn what's happening in here. And then we walked through a series of specific coins, and I want to take us back to 2 in particular: racism and settler colonialism. And remember, I told a story about finding out I was white when I was 28 years old, and I didn't understand racism as a structure, but rather as something that only happened amongst bad people. Bad people do intentionally. Whereas now I can see racism as a coin rooted in history, where whiteness was invented centuries ago to give advantage to people whose skin looks like mine, or folks with proximity to whiteness, and to create disadvantage for those who don't, to exploit, to dehumanize, to make possible transatlantic slave trade and colonization. And this is our time to tune in again to this fundamental question in this work. When we're talking about these coins, is this about good or bad people? Am I saying that white people are bad? I am not. For white folks on the top of this coin, and any coin where you find yourself on top, right? Able-bodied folks on the top of ableism, settlers on the top of settler colonialism, straight folks on the top of heteronormativity, cis folks on the top of cisgenderism, cisnormativity. We want to be affirmed in all of those identities. The problem is the coin and the power structure that it advances. So when people say to me, Stephanie, you received unearned advantage from racism, Stephanie, what you just did was racist. It's not an attack on my character. It's feedback I need, because I find myself on the top of this coin and I want to move beyond words into action. I need that feedback to understand my complicity in this coin. And settler colonialism, giving unearned disadvantage to Indigenous folks. And at the heart, underpinning both racism and settler colonialism, is the core concept, the system of white supremacy. White supremacy, and I'm not talking here about white supremacists, individuals intentionally advancing whiteness as a power structure. I'm talking about white supremacy, the political, economic, and cultural system, the system that has shaped our nation, shaped our institutions, shaped ourselves, in which folks who are white overwhelmingly control power and material resources, where conscious and unconscious ideas of white superiority, right? Whiteness as the default norm, how I was able to see my whiteness as just nothing, how that is widespread, and how these relations of dominance and subordination are reenacted. And so this walks us to this important insight that if we are authentically engaged in anti-racist action, that is synonymous, that is the same thing as being dedicated to uprooting white supremacy and how it intersects with other. So at the end of our last session, we arrived at these take-home messages that we need to move towards commitments such as I see and understand my own role in upholding systems of oppression that create inequities. That I learn from the expertise of, I give credit to, and I work in solidarity with, right, across the coin, with marginalized folks to help me. That's who needs help here in terms of how to dismantle this coin, because it's bad for all of us. And that one of our special roles for all those coins where we find ourselves on top is to mobilize action among other folks on top, because they are going to hear from those of us in these same bodies differently than those on the bottom of the coin. Now let's extend. Let's go deeper. Let's go further. Let's continue our nuancing, our sense making. Stretching that this commitment extends to, I understand that effective anti-racist action requires a prerequisite for authentic anti-racist action, anti-colonial action, is recognizing that I must name, interrupt, and uproot white supremacy and ongoing colonial patterns. And further, and for anybody working in EDI, tune in here. Further, I understand that this logic extends to EDI work broadly, which must resist the current norm in EDI of diversifying within whiteness, right? Where whiteness goes unquestioned. We do all this work in EDI without ever naming whiteness, and move instead to uprooting whiteness as a power structure that intersects so insidiously with all of the other coins that we're concerned with in EDI. All of this to be able to mobilize in collective action under the movement leaders, right? The people leading the struggles, the people with the expertise in terms of how to dismantle these coins. So let's scaffold, let's build on that. How do we move to action? How does the influence of white supremacy and colonization, how does it actually show up in our actions? How can we come to understand that better so that when we can see it, we can act differently, right? This is all about application. How can we move differently in this world in a way that is more lined up with the commitments that we're making with our words? And so we want to bring an activity to you that Ed and I have created with our close collaborator, Lana James. And we've built this from a beautiful teaching tool by Professor Barnor Hesse called the 8 White Identities. And it asks this question: how are our actions related to upholding or dismantling whiteness as a power structure? And you may ask, whose actions? Whose actions? Well, with this exercise, it's everybody, because we all have the potential to uphold or dismantle white supremacy through our actions. We have all been socialized by these coins. But it is especially for my colleagues in the audience tonight who are white. For all of us here today in this Zoom room doing this special work, who find ourselves being white, who find ourselves on the top of this coin, tune in, tune in. Here we go. I want to begin by offering you the idea of 2 poles. And at one end of the pole, one end is what we're going to try out some names today. So I'm going to call white dominance. These are folks who are explicitly, very intentionally trying to advance whiteness as a power structure. So this is folks who would proudly identify as white supremacists. This is who you would think of often when we think of white supremacists. I assume that if you've come to join this session today, it's none of you, right? It's hardly anyone I ever interface with in the healthcare, social care world. And then the other end of the continuum, whiteness transformed. This is a yet to be imagined future, a way of being for all of us, where we have collectively done the work of undoing the power invested in racial hierarchies. Anti-oppression work is imagination work. And so this whiteness transformed is that beautiful future we're working towards. So we have one pole that I'm assuming is folks that's not us. The other pole, this yet to be imagined future. What's in the middle? In the middle are 3 ways of being actions. It's constellations of actions in relation to upholding or interrupting whiteness that I would propose we all participate in throughout our days. I do all of these. I move between them. And I want to make them more visible for you. So let's start with the first one called white neutrals. White neutrals see racism as only interpersonal, right? Not structural, not to do with where we find ourselves in history. Something that bad people, right? It couldn't be me because I'm not being bad, therefore it has nothing to do. View being colorblind as a form of anti-racism and other claims to neutrality. And when it comes to EDI work, this is all the ways we do EDI focused exclusively on diversity, but alongside a normalization of whiteness as a power structure, as opposed to an interruption of it. So when we are operating in this space, it's all our actions that move toward justice without seeing or naming whiteness as a site of power. How might this show up? One of the common ways is when someone offers feedback that what someone just did or said was racist. And there is a reaction that that couldn't be true, that that person couldn't be racist. And some of the common frames we hear are, she would never do that because she's a really good person. Meaning we need to uncouple goodness and badness. Or it's a misunderstanding. She would never have intended to cause harm. With our more nuanced analysis, you can see we need to uncouple intent from racism and refocus on impact. He's a physician, so he's objective, neutral, and fair. And with our more nuanced analysis, we see we need to debunk the notion of neutrality when it comes to these coins. And what about white polites? These are all those times when we are taking action, we are actually engaging in anti-racist action. But we're doing it in such a way that's not based on collective liberation, dismantling the coin because it's bad for all, but doing it for folks who are racialized. And if that is our orientation, then we do it in a way that requires that we are rewarded for it, that we are seen doing it. We often seek validation from racialized folks for any of our efforts. Often with this approach, we value niceness and comfort over justice. When things get difficult or full of conflict, it's easy for us to flee. And we'll make mistakes. And when we do, when we get that feedback, we don't see it as a gift, we receive it as a personal attack and a lack of gratitude. Let's flesh this out. So we're trying to take action. We are being brave. We're stepping out of our comfort zone and doing things that disrupt. And then we receive feedback that what we just did was off the mark, was racist. Whew. What happens then? For white polites, we feel like what we just did was brave and scary and risky, and we want to be honored for that. And so when we get the feedback that we just made things worse, it leads to a feeling of lack of gratitude. Why is this a problem? And it's the orientation, isn't it? Part of the doing for orientation. That means we need to receive some kind of credit or cookie or badge for engaging in anti-racist action. And the burden that this creates for racialized folks to serve the feelings of people like me. It also leads to people like me often walking away when the going gets tough because I feel underappreciated, because it's not worth my trouble. So the question for all of these is not, do I do these? It's when do I do this? I do this. I do the behaviors in white neutral. And I really try to move towards doing the behaviors in white change makers. So what are white change makers? This is all the series, the constellation of actions that take on board critiques of whiteness as a power structure, that act to interrupt complicity. This is what Barner Hesse calls whiteness speaking back to whiteness. This is about understanding it's not just the one coin, it's all of the coins, and not allowing whiteness as a power structure to reassert itself insidiously when we've managed to dismantle it in one place. This is recognizing that these coins didn't come from nowhere. They were created by people on the top of the coin. And yet the burden falls to those on the bottom of the coin to try and dismantle them. So white change makers, those are all the actions of white folks showing up to take on our share of the burden and the risk to do the work of dismantling this coin. What might it look like? Oh, she would never do that because she's a really good person. She couldn't be racist. And the white change maker showing up with, yeah, you know, and with heart and with love here. She is a really wonderful person, but this is about something else. Oh, it's a misunderstanding. She would never have intended to cause harm. This is the white change maker showing up and saying, I am sure you are right. I'm sure she didn't intend to cause harm, but we need to focus on the impact of these actions. And with humility, the question around neutrality, sort of bringing our humbleness forward. Yes, I used to think that way myself. I am working on unlearning that and understanding it differently. And for those of us engaged in this work, when we make missteps, instead of a lack of gratitude and the urge to flee, the white change maker, those are all the actions that frame that kind of feedback as a gift. In fact, it's a sign that we're in the work making mistakes, and an opening has just happened. An opening has just happened for us to build trust with the person who just gave us that feedback through apology, repair, making amends. So we know that in this journey from 1 down to 5, 1 is bad, isn't it? We don't want to be up in 1. But neither do we want to be in 2 and 3. We do not want to be participating in the area of white neutrals or polites. That's also sending us backwards. We are trying to more and more move towards the actions that are aligned with white change makers. And I'm going to finish here with a short story that I learned from great Indigenous physician and public health leader Marcia Anderson. It's the metaphor of a football field. And we've got a team, the O's, trying to move to the end zone to achieve justice, right? That's the win here, achieving justice. And we have the other team, the X's, getting in their way. On the O's team, we see the little person in pink, the quarterback, holding the ball. This is the person with the great expertise in terms of how to dismantle these coins. And in this metaphor, I'm going to use the color purple to represent those of us on the top of the coin. So where do those of us on the top of the coin often show up in this metaphor? We are structured to be on the X team, aren't we? We are in the way of the O team trying to achieve justice. Where do we want to move? We want to move to be part of the O team. And importantly, we are not rushing over to take the ball from the leader, the little pink O. No. We are not rushing. We just got to this issue. We're here to write the policy. We're here to take over and decide how resources should be allocated. We're here to decide what the solution should look like. No, we are here to block. We are here to bring our power and safety to make way to help that leader get the ball in solidarity down to the end zone. Unfortunately, what happens most often is it's not just one X that's in the way. It is many, many X's, a collective of us on the top of a coin, blocking and getting in the way of the O's trying to achieve justice, when really what we want, what is within reach, what we can move towards right now, is being part of a collective of O's, right? A collective of O's blocking and working in solidarity to get to the end zone. Because who are these X's? What are the behaviors that go with the X's? It's not just the white dominance. It's also all the times when our actions are aligned with white neutrals or white polites. And what are we when we're over with the O team? Those are the actions aligned with white change makers. And so we give you a moment. Stop, take a breath, go to your questions. What insights are landing for you? What feelings are happening for you? What new opportunities for learning in action have come to light? Let's give you a moment to collect your thoughts. Can I ask for the slide to be advanced, please? So we're transitioning now to the second teaching. We were reflecting on different ways that the colonized mind plays out in action. And now we want to turn our attention to what is the impact on Indigenous folks. How has colonization impacted Indigenous people's understanding of who they are, and what might lessons be for those of us on different sides of coins? So over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I'm going to carry the story now forward from where I left off. Given all of what Stephanie has shared with you in the teachings now that she's provided and your reflections that you're starting to form, I'm going to carry the story from where I left off about colonization and the two-row wampum and the experiences in 1613 of my Indigenous ancestors as they attempted to create a peace treaty to live in peace on this land and share Turtle Island and all its resources, and to live in what I closed off with saying in a form as we understood it as equality, honoring and respecting the differences that exist between us, but also, most importantly, recognizing the fundamental sameness or similarities that exist that make us all human, and that enables us then to share this land in peace. But what happened then at that point from 1613, as I said, as we came to know and understand, my ancestors began to learn to be able to read the language that was written and the treaties that were formed, and in the treaty that was formed that they thought was representing the two-row wampum, actually understood that the perceptions that and the thinking that was there within the colonizers' minds was that we were less than. And that is what, as you can see, forms the challenges that we face in terms of the coin or the inequality that the coin represents, and the form and the impacts of colonization on peoples who are of Indigenous ancestry, particularly in many lands around the globe, around Mother Earth. So in particular, what happened here in the story was that the concepts of inequality, the experiences of colonization, they all brought about then a change in the relationship between the Indigenous people and the colonizers. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So these teachings come from a friend of mine by the name of BHSc. She's one of the first social workers of Indigenous ancestry in Canada. And she was one of the people I learned many things from. I would call her one of my elders. And this teaching was a piece that came out of experiences that she had when she was contracted by the federal government to write a workbook that was actually about applying the understandings of family therapy in Indigenous forms in healing practices within our addictions and solvent abuse centers to train our people in the ways to use family therapy or systems theory in order to help people in their healing from the impacts of colonization. When she did this and created this manual, she actually had the opportunity to cross the country and speak with many families of Indigenous ancestry about their experiences with colonization. And as she did this, she came to understand the ways that our people have come to adapt to the experiences of colonization in order to survive. And that what the impact of colonization had on their actual identities was a way of seeing and understanding how colonization acts in such a way as to change people's ways of knowing who they are. And in fact, not only changing how they know who they are, but in fact, releasing or letting go of their knowledge of who they are. And in fact, and releasing and letting go of the knowledge of where they come from. As that happened, B came to develop this way of thinking as she came to see what people had been doing and have been doing since that experience of contact in order to adapt and survive. These kinds of identities she was able to recognize. And as she shared this with people, she was saying it's not for the purpose of labeling anybody. This is just to help us understand what the impacts of colonization have been on our Indigenous people in terms of the ways that we know ourselves, how we know each other, how we know all of creation and creator. Our ways of thinking, as I shared with you at the very beginning, that's embodied within such things as the Thanksgiving address, all of those ways of knowing and thinking were challenged by the ways of knowing and thinking of the worldview of what we now call the white or the white supremacist form of thought that is embodied within colonization. So the first one of the identities was what she called lost identities. And these are the people who have lost all sense of who they are. They've lost the ability to be able to make meaning of life. They don't know, in essence, where they come from. They don't know who they are, and they have an incredibly difficult time being able to vision anything hopeful to move towards. Those people who have not taken on the knowledge or the meanings and the ways of thinking of the Euro-Western form or the white way of thinking, those folks basically have also been disconnected from their Indigenous ways of knowing and thinking. And as a result, now I said they're the lost identities. And these are the people who are at the greatest risk to lose life. In fact, not to live very healthy lives and to live very short and what we would now refer to in our ways of knowing about and thinking about suicide as premature unnatural deaths. Many of these are people died very young and at a premature stage in life, could live much longer, but these are the folks who often are in this, what we would say, lost identities. So if you could change to the next, thank you. Assimilated identities. So these are the people who then adopt the ways of non-Indigenous society. They take on those values, the ethics, the beliefs, the ways of knowing and thinking, the worldview, what sometimes people will call and identify as materialistic, and they accept the forms of hierarchical power and control that exist, as we talked about, within the coin model. They typically are now in that upper kind of state, above the others who now even are their relatives and some of their families and their communities and their people. They now look down upon those who have maintained their culture and their ways of knowing and thinking. So there becomes now this divide and they accept again the competitive nature of existence and believe that that's the way to live. If you could go to the next, please. Thank you. Reclaimed Indigenous identities, which are now those who have, we sometimes spoke about them as born again Indians. And when she wrote this and put this together, these thoughts came together over 30 years ago. And they often were still talking about us, and we were even referring to ourselves in the nature of as being Indians. Of course, we now have identified ourselves as Indigenous people, Indigenous to this land. So what B said about these folks are the ones who are reclaiming or relearning their Indigenous worldview and their cultures, and they're coming back to know its importance to them. In order to be able to know who they are, they need to know where they've come from. And as they do that and are able to make those kinds of connections and reconnections, they actually then begin to develop a capacity to be able to vision a more hopeful future and live a longer and a healthier life. This is the people who also, as they do this, they also, though, are caught in essence between two worlds, because they almost have, as we would often say in the understanding of the two-row, 1 foot in the ship and 1 foot in the canoe. And they're actually now trying to figure out who they are and where they are in life. They sometimes will then impose their values as they're in that state, their new formed values upon others, and even the beliefs that they're taking on in a way that is not the way of the Indigenous worldview, which, as I said at the beginning, the Indigenous worldview is one of accepting others and their beliefs, their values for them, and we honor and respect those, but then also find where it is that we come together. If you could turn to the next, please. So the grounded Indigenous identities are those who are actually then born and raised within our Indigenous worldview, within a community and a family, who have either maintained the practices or have regained it and solidified it in such a way that they now have maintained and developed a worldview that is Indigenous in nature. And that's really embodied in what I shared with you in the opening address, in the Thanksgiving address. the history that they have, they know their history, they know where they've come from, they know who they are. They understand the nature of all things as being interdependent and equal in all of creation, nothing greater than, nothing less than. That's the way their worldview informs them about who they are within existence and how they relate to all of creation and to Creator and to each other. And therefore offers a strong emotional and spiritual peer support as they are part of, connected to each other, family, community, and all of creation, and most importantly, Creator. And then finally, B identified the fifth category that she actually called One Earth. She didn't call this One Earth Identities. She had other labels or names, but these are the ones that reflect more accurately how we think of this today. And One Earth Identities are really those who appreciate the gifts of both worlds. I spoke about the concept at the beginning of two-eyed seeing that also emanates or comes out of the two-row wampum and informs us today about how we can understand the world around us in such a way that we can truly follow. If we follow that two-row wampum and the teachings within it, we can come to understand that, first of all, I know who I am, I know where I come from, I know my teachings and my beliefs and my values, and I am strong in that, and that forms the foundation of who I am. But from that foundation, we then can also, as the two-eyed seeing speaks to it, and this comes, two-eyed seeing comes from the Mi'kmaq people. Albert Marshall was an elder there who actually first spoke it out into the world, but it comes from their teachings. And it speaks then to the understanding of being able to see the world through two eyes, but having that clear foundation of who you are, where you come from, and then you can go out into the world and interact with those and with other ways and other teachings, and you can then take on what it is that enhances your ways of knowing and your understanding of creation, Creator, and all of our relations. And by doing that, we enhance all of life, and we enhance, and this is what I believe in is actually what Creator meant us to do. And ultimately to form that way of knowing and thinking that enables us to be able to create true peace in the world, where we can actually live with equality to each other, to all of creation, and with Creator. This then provides a hopeful vision of the future. So those are some thoughts that I'll give to you that come out of our experiences as Indigenous people going through the experience of colonization and where we are now, what we have learned and what potentially now we can learn and use to move forward. So if you could pass to the next slide then. I shared this with you before, and it's a vision, of course, that was shared with me. It's a picture that I own, that I have, that was gifted to me from one of my elders before he passed. And once again, this is what I see as that hopeful vision that I just spoke of. It comes, in fact, our children can show us better than what we as adults can see. You know, when our children come together, you know, what do we do as adults, as parents? The first things we know that we taught them, and usually we attempt to teach them in relationship with others, is about getting along. And we encourage them to use what they have as their gifts to be in good relationship with others. And naturally, if you look at children, you'll see they do that without much teaching. In fact, most often they can come to do that without any adult intervention. But what happens over time as we socialize children is we start to put into their minds a way of thinking and knowing that prefaces or emphasizes difference and begins to minimize or to put down difference that they see in others. And that typically, in my experiences with children, does not come from the child, but comes from the adults and what they see the adults teaching, both in action as well as in words. This picture reminds me of that hopeful vision that my elders have shared with me, telling me, right, that it's our children who can see that the world is not really divided as it's being presented to them. That's virtual. It's not real. The real world is one that has no boundaries upon it. I encouraged you even at the beginning to think and begin thinking that way when I invited you to tell us and to share with us where you come from, not by where the lines are that divide us, but rather from the lands which actually unite us. So I leave you with those thoughts to consider as you go forward in your journey, understanding more deeply what EDI really is, which I believe is ultimately peacemaking. So miigwech, nyawa. I'll pass it back to Stephanie, I guess.
Thank you, Ed, for that profound teaching. This is your moment, each of you, to stop, reflect. The workshop that matters is the one that's going on in your head, in your heart. So this is your chance to ask yourself, what am I picking up today? What did it turn out I needed to learn about today or unlearn? We're seeing some beautiful messages coming directly to us through the chat box about folks who aren't Indigenous, but receiving beautiful inspiration from Ed's words, seeing how it relates perhaps to their own experience on the bottom of various coins. And now if we could move to one more poll. This poll asks us, I had the experience of unlearning something today. Yes, no, or unsure. Such a big part of this work is not just gaining new knowledge, but uprooting, unearthing the assumptions that were in place that we didn't even know we had, the unlearning. Could we see the results, please? A lot of yes, a little bit of no, and how beautiful, the unsure, right? That's the kind of humility we need in this work. I'm not sure, I am working on it. And there's the invitation to keep tuning in. The next poll, please. How do you feel? And you can pick as many of these as you want. Your options are energized, overwhelmed. I'm going to pause and say, if any of you are watching this recording afterwards and you don't get to see the polls, you go ahead and do this yourself too. Tune into how are you feeling? Seen, affirmed, unsettled in a good way, sad, stuck, unstuck, curious, ashamed, wobbly. Can we see the results, please? A little of everything here, with more than half of you saying you feel unsettled in a good way, more than half of you saying you are curious, a third saying you are energized, but over a quarter saying a bit overwhelmed. So honoring that, what needs to happen at the end of this workshop, do the sense making. And remembering that there's supports available, not just for folks who are feeling like they're really struggling, but also who just want to work through some of these ideas. Supports available after this session. Can we have the final poll, please? This is about action. This poll is, I have identified concrete next steps for myself. So that's first step. Have you even got one or two actions ready to go? And if so, what level are they at? It's the invitation to remember that we need action at the interrelated levels of the internal, my inner work to do, my learning, unlearning, the embodied work, spiritual work. At the level of the interpersonal, how we treat each other, the actions we take, which in this case can mean immediately, instant action you can take is redistributing resources, money, moving money, redistributing power. And at the institutional level, related to policies, processes, power, you can pick as many of these as you want. What we're moving towards, our answer is where you pick all three of these, right? And you're like, I've got so many actions in there at all the levels because all the levels matter. Let's see our results, please. So most are at the internal level. 85% of you identified actions at the internal level, and then 47 at the interpersonal, 42 at the institutional. That's pretty great. Honor those actions. What's it going to mean to move them forward? We are so grateful for your time, your attention, the wisdom you brought to the session today, the care. And now I am happy to turn it back to our hosts at Health Excellence Canada for some closing words before Ed comes back with a closing prayer.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Ed. I've really been reflecting on how well phrased your questions were about what are my insights, how do I feel, and what are my next steps. And one of the things that's really been resonating for me, as I've had a 25-year career in trying to change the institution of the healthcare system from a cultural safety perspective, is how much I actually avoided using the word racism. And so we concentrated on cultural safety, which for me is the way I feel as an Indigenous patient when unconscious bias and systemic racism are making me uncomfortable. But there isn't often in our complaint forms in the healthcare system, in our evaluations of programs, any space where I can identify whether my cultural safety or the racism that I have experienced is impacting my journey receiving health care. And it made me think about how often in a workshop, I might hear that comment that you made around white neutrals of, I don't see color, I treat all my patients the same. And my response to that comment has always been, I want you to treat my broken leg the same, I want you to treat my pneumonia the same, but if you fail to acknowledge that I am a Métis woman, an Indigenous woman before you, you've made me invisible. And now you've just reduced me to the sum of my parts. And it's that discomfort of being invisible that makes me feel culturally unsafe. But I want to have courage to use more the word racism and systemic racism. And so I want to be able to push through the discomfort for myself and the discomfort for others when I bring those words to the forefront. Because I don't think any of us can be change makers if we're not brave and using the words in that space. And then I'm really acknowledging that I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed and a bit guilty and a bit sad that maybe I've done some disservice in my journey to date. And so the other thing I want to commit to is creating a group of like-minded individuals and colleagues for myself where I can safely go and unpack those emotions. Because I want to recognize that as I move forward, trying to embrace patient engagement and ways in which we can have the lived experience voice in our system, that it's going to come with some uncomfortableness in an internal space. So thank you so much for your sharing and for what is really something so intriguing. I think I will be spending days in the future unpacking what I have learned and unlearned today. Over to you, Maria.
Thanks so much, Denise, and echoing the deep thanks and gratitude to Ed and Stephanie, and also want to add thanks to our healthcare excellence staff and our team of interpreters who've been providing French translation as well as visual interpretation today, who are making things happen behind the scenes. And thank you to all of you who joined us today, and thanks for sharing some of your reflections and learning and unlearning in the chat with us, and certainly some of the reflections that are really resonating with me are that neutrality doesn't move us forward, and to think about, and be aware of when might I be, as Stephanie shared, the framing of a white neutral or a white polite or an opportunity to be a white change maker. So thank you so much. As Denise and others have reflected, some of the conversations we've been having, maybe making people feel uncomfortable, and we recognize that, and that's an important part of unlearning as well. We also want to remind folks that a counselor is available to anyone if you'd just like an opportunity to debrief, or for any reason, just to support our well-being, you can reach out to a counselor for 3 hours following this session, and the numbers in the chat, as well as reminding folks it's 1-855-529-9463. We will be emailing additional resources and a link to today's session to all participants who've signed up for today, and it will be posted on our website as well. We'll also be including an online survey, so you can give us more feedback about how sessions 1 and 2 to help us in moving forwards together. We hope to see you at our next session. This is a 3-part series, and our 3rd session is happening on March 23rd. I'm going to hand over to Ed to close us in a good way. Thank you everyone for joining us, and take care. Over to you, Ed.
Oh, thank you, Maria. I'll close us off as I began, bringing us full circle to the thoughts about all our relations. And in our Indigenous thinking, all our relations actually speaks to everything in creation. And so I'll give you one thought about that too, as it comes out of a teaching as we close. And it's a teaching that came through one of my elders, Alex Skeed, when I worked with him many years ago up in the area of Treaty 3. And this is a story that a teaching he gave to me as we were sitting together waiting for a group of youth to come join us for some teachings with some elders. As we were sitting, he was sharing some teachings about all of what we need to support our lives is out there in creation. It's all around us. And he was pointing out the windows to the trees and to the bush. As he said that and was teaching me that, he all of a sudden stopped and he looked down at the floor, and I followed his eyes to the floor, and there was this little ant that was walking into the circle that we had of chairs wrapped that was around our big drum. And that little ant was walking into the circle towards the drum. And as I looked and followed his eyes, he said, "Look, you see that ant?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "He's my brother." And I looked at him, I paused for a moment, he stopped like that, and then he said, "Yes, he's my brother. He's no greater than I, and I'm no greater than him. We're brothers." And then he said, "When we can once again form our minds in that way, we'll understand how to have peace on earth, on Mother Earth." So I leave you with that thought as a close to what we have shared, and hopefully that stimulates your further thinking and sharing and dialogue about these ideas that we're sharing with you today. So we close with Miigwech, Nyawa, Creator. We're grateful for this day, and I wish you all well and health as you journey on. Miigwech, Nyawa.